At Bamberg by the sea there looms a dark rock. On this rock stands a castle, and in that castle there once lived a mighty king. The king had a daughter, but no sons, and his wife was dead. As the years went by, he grew tired of having only the girl's company by the fireside, and he longed to marry again. So he rode out through his realm, searching high and low for a woman fine enough to be his new queen. At last he found a high-born lady who was beautiful, quick-witted, and skilled at the charms of love. She accepted the king's marriage proposal eagerly, too eagerly, some people believed. Within days they were celebrating their wedding, and the queen took her throne beside the king. The king was ecstatically happy, for when the queen poured out his wine each night, she always laced it with love potion. But the rest of the court found the queen domineering and hard-hearted. They all hated her. The one who hated her the most was the queen's new stepdaughter, the princess. The princess had almost grown up by then, and she was very beautiful. Also, her grace and gentleness were widely admired. The new queen was jealous of her, and because of this she bullied her. She locked away the princess's jewelry, made her dress in cast-offs, and sent her away early from dinner, so the poor girl grew pale and thin. One day a special feast was held at the castle. All the guests who had come to it had to swear an oath, praising the king and queen. The nobles and their ladies all queued eagerly at the throne. One by one they fell to their knees and declared, "You are the mightiest king and the fairest lady in all the world. I swear to honor you." Then the king rewarded each with an exquisite gift, a fine sword or a golden ring. At length it was the turn of a handsome youth whom no one had ever seen before. In fact, the youth was a stranger in the kingdom and had only got into the feast by bribing the guards. He walked to the throne with a jaunty step, and his voice rang out loudly and clearly through the great hall as he declared, "You are the mightiest king in all the world. I swear to honor you." Then he rose and turned to walk away without claiming his gift. The king called him back with an angry shout. "Young man, wait. Your oath is only half made." The youth made no effort to correct his mistake, and he brazenly ignored the queen. He walked quickly to a stool in the shadows where the princess was sitting quietly. He bowed deeply to her and said, "My lady, they call me the young knight of the wind, and I have traveled countless miles to attend this feast, all because of you. For it is true what they say, the queen is not the fairest lady in the world. You are." The princess blushed like a wild rose and gazed up at him in amazement. The king, too, looked astonished, but the queen leaped from her throne with a piercing shriek. "Guards, seize that slanderous wretch!" she cried. "Take him down to the beach. As soon as the tide turns to go out, throw him into a small boat without oars and set him adrift upon the sea." The guards seized the young knight of the wind and dragged him away. "The feast is cancelled," proclaimed the queen. "All of you go home and keep silence. If anyone dare say a word against me, you shall be banished from this realm." The guests stood up trembling and filed out of the hall. The luscious food on the table was left untouched. The princess began to weep, and the king went to comfort her, but the queen slapped him away with an angry hiss. "So, you little hussy," the queen said to the princess, "what do you think of your admirer?" "He seems both brave and noble," the princess whispered. "I can tell you for sure that he is neither," snapped the queen. "And what do you think of his judgment? Do you really think you are the fairest lady in the world?" "That isn't for me to answer," the princess replied. "Indeed," said the queen crisply. So I shall answer for you, not with words, but with deeds." Behind the throne stood a table laden with treasures. The queen went to it and rummaged through the treasures until she found a small black glass bottle and a silver cup. She pulled the stopper from the bottle and poured a dark liquid into the cup. Then she seized the princess, held the cup to her lips, and forced the liquid down her throat. The princess spluttered and gasped. "Stop!" the king cried, running over to her. He tried to snatch the bottle away, but the queen was too nimble. "What are you doing? Are you trying to poison her?" "No," said the queen, "not poison. This is witchcraft." "Witchcraft?" exclaimed the king in horror. The queen gave a demonic laugh. "Watch her, and you will see." The vile brew was already taking effect. The princess writhed about, stretching and squirming in agony, and as she did so, her body began to change. Her dress burst from her. Her smooth white skin blistered, and the blisters turned to scales. Her hair fell out. Horns butted on her head. Claws grew from her hands. She fell onto all fours. Her body grew elongated, sprouting wings and a quivering tail. The king turned white. At first he could not speak. Then he said hoarsely, "Oh, you evil witch! How I curse the day that I married you! What have you done to my beloved daughter?" "You must be even more of a fool than I thought, if you need to ask that," the queen retorted. "Can't you see with your own eyes? I've turned her into a dragon." Meanwhile, the young Knight of the Wind had been bound, gagged, and cast away on the sea. A fierce storm had blown up as soon as he was set adrift. This, too, was due to the queen's witchery. At first he feared he would be broken to smithereens on the rocks, but he had been born with luck on his side, and he soon found himself caught in a current that swept him safely past the rocks and out to the open sea. There he drifted for several days, until at last he was washed up on the distant shores of Norway. Here the queen's spells were too far away to touch him, and he quickly recovered from his ordeal. He offered allegiances to the king of that land, and was rewarded with food, a place to sleep in his hall, weapons, armor, and gold. Months passed. The young Knight of the Wind grew taller, stronger, and even bolder. But although he thrived on his new life, he could not settle, for he still thought constantly of the princess. He asked everywhere for news of her. At last he met a traveler, newly sailed in from Bamberg, who told him, "The queen has turned her stepdaughter into a loathsome, flame-breathing dragon. The dragon is causing chaos all over the kingdom. It's eating all the crops and animals, and the people are starving. Also, its fiery breath is burning down all the houses." "But the king has many brave warriors in his court," said the young Knight of the Wind. "Why don't they kill the dragon?" "The king won't allow it," said the traveler, "for he can't forget that the dragon was once his beloved daughter. But it seems that the queen will soon overrule him, for due to her witchcraft, she now holds the king completely in her power. She has declared that she will allow the dragon to live in the castle for a year and a day. After that, she'll ignore the king's objections and will have it killed." When the young Knight of the Wind heard this, he knew the time to act had come. He also realized that although he was a skilled and valiant warrior, this was not enough to overcome the queen. So he hurried to the cottage of an old woman who was famed for her wisdom and knowledge of magic. He gave her a purse of the gold he had earned for serving the Norwegian king. Then he begged the old woman to advise him what to do to save the princess. The old woman took the gold gratefully. She held a candle to the young Knight of the Wind's face and studied him intently in its light. "I can see you are honest," she said at last, "so I'll give you 3 pieces of advice. First, when you build a new boat to sail home in, make sure you use wood cut from a rowan tree. It's the only kind that's guaranteed to be stronger than witchcraft. Second, when the dragon comes at you, roaring with fire and hatred, your first thought will be to kill it to save your life. Don't do that. Instead, remind yourself of who the dragon really is. Then, follow your heart. Third, when your deeds are done and the dragon is gone, you'll still have one more thing to do. Go to the queen, seize the scepter from her hand, and throw it into the waves. I promise you won't be sorry." The old woman shut her mouth abruptly and showed him to the door. The young knight of the wind thanked her. Then he hurried away. He chopped down a sturdy rowan tree and crafted it into a boat. As soon as it was finished, he set sail for Bamberg. As he drew near, the sea swirled and seethed with the evil spell of the queen. An unnatural wind blew up and lashed the waves, tossing the little boat this way and that. Thunder rumbled and lightning struck the mast, but the rowan wood held fast and true, and the young knight of the wind reached the beach below the castle without coming to any harm. As he landed, he heard a loud bellowing, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of burning. The sand shuddered beneath his feet. The next moment he was dazzled by the brightness of fire. Above him the castle seemed to shake. Its gates opened and the dragon came slithering out. It stood on the rocks in a billowing cloud of smoke. Then it spread its wing and soared into the air. Even the bold young knight of the wind could not help cowering under its monstrous shadow. 3 times the beast circled him before it landed in front of him on the beach. The young knight of the wind had never faced anything so huge, loathsome, and ugly. Never in any battle had he felt such fear. He was overwhelmed by a desire to kill it. He gripped his sword and crept towards it, aiming the blade at the monster's heart. The dragon opened his vast mouth and belched out flames, watching him with red, bulbous eyes. But at that moment, the wise woman's words came back to him. The young knight of the wind turned his gaze from the dragon, and in his mind's eye he conjured up a picture of his beloved princess. Oh, how lovely she had been before the queen bewitched her! How gentle and graceful! With trembling hands, he forced himself to put away his sword. He inched closer. The dragon stood stock still. The young knight of the wind sweated under its fiery breath. He choked at its stench. Still closer he came. He put out his hands. He brushed his fingers against its warty scales and moved even nearer. Thinking of the princess, he put his lips to the dragon's scaly skin, and 3 times he kissed it. On the 3rd kiss, the dragon suddenly shuddered away from him. Its fire fizzled out in a rush of cold air. It began to shrivel and shrink. Its skin collapsed as if its bones were crumbling. The sand gave way beneath it, and the beast sank into a gaping hole. Storm clouds rushed across the sky and blocked out the sun. Then a wind sent the sand spiraling up into the air until the young knight of the wind was almost blinded. When it cleared, he saw a pale figure emerging from the hole, luminous in the stormlight. Then he knew for sure that the evil spell had been broken, for it was the princess. She ran to the young knight of the wind. He caught her in his arms, and they embraced. As they did so, a crowd of courtiers, servants, noble ladies, and warriors came swarming from the castle, cheering down to the beach. At the head of the throng was the king. He was as overjoyed as the young knight of the wind to see the loathsome dragon gone and the princess back in her true shape. He offered the young knight the princess's hand in marriage and half his fortune. The young knight was eager to accept, and so was the princess. But before they could shake hands on it, the cheering crowd fell silent, for the evil queen had come down to the beach. The queen raised her hands and began to mutter the words of another venomous spell. But the young knight of the wind knew now that his will was stronger than hers. He strode up to her, snatched the scepter from her hand as the wise woman had advised him, and hurled it into the sea. At once the queen was devoured from inside by her own witchery. She began to spin around so fast that no eye could follow her. When the spinning finally slowed and stopped, the queen was gone. In her place crouched an ugly, croaking toad. And that was the end of the queen. All her powers of witchery were dead. In her toad shape she crawled away to a damp ditch. There she had to lurk, despising and despised, living on flies and beetles until she died. As for the young knight of the wind and the princess, they got married without delay and were very happy. When the princess's father grew too old to rule, the young knight of the wind became the new king, and everyone said that he ruled with great generosity and wisdom.